I'm going to talk to you a little bit about my academic career first. I'm going to do this fairly quickly, and then I will talk to you about my research. And I'm hoping to give you a flavor of the kinds of methods we can use to ask interesting questions. And I'm obviously only talking about my area of research. You've heard about lots of different areas of science, and I think that's the beauty of this workshop. You get exposure to lots of different science areas, and you can think, oh, this interests me a bit more than something else, and that hopefully will give you inspiration. So I did my schooling in Finland, not here in the UK, and I first went to university here, finished my undergraduate degree here at UCL in 1998. And what's very funny for me is that I am currently faculty in the same department as some of the people who taught me. So this makes for good fodder for an imposter syndrome. When you go to a staff meeting with people who have been your lecturers, you kind of feel like someone's going to throw me out any minute now. So I finished it in 1998, and then I did a research assistant post for 2 years. So I didn't know that I wanted to be a scientist. I was thinking that I might actually want to do clinical psychology, and in order to do clinical psychology, you have to work a few years in a clinically relevant area. So I was a research assistant in a group that was led by both Uta Frith and also James Blair, who did research into psychopathy. So these are people who are extremely antisocial. And I was so fascinated by this research that instead of doing clinical, I thought I want to do a PhD. So I applied for a PhD, and I was really, really interested in thinking about genetic influences on behavior. And there was only one place in the UK at the time that did a degree that was really focused on that, and that was at King's. So I went and did a Medical Research Council funded PhD, which was a 4-year program at King's College. And I worked with a woman called Francesca Happe, who is a very famous professor of developmental disorders and who was actually Uta's PhD student. So Uta is sort of my academic grandmother, if you like. After I did my PhD, I got funding from Economic and Social Research Council to do what's called a postdoc at King's. So postdoc is when you have just done your PhD, you're not quite ready to do a lectureship yet. You're getting a bit more research skills. And I worked with someone called Robert Plomin, who does behavior genetics research at King's. And I got my lecturer post at UCL in 2005. And it felt so strange to come here and to be the one who's giving the lectures. And like I said, to go to staff meeting with people who had lectured me not so long ago. So I have been working at UCL ever since. I was promoted to professor in 2011, and I have had 2 children along the way. These are slightly old photos. I had Ava in 2007, she's now 11, and she's at an age where she finds me very, very embarrassing. And I speak Finnish with her, and I am now requested to speak Finnish in public so that people don't understand me, and that's less embarrassing. Sadly, I don't feel sad at all about being embarrassing. I rather relish it. So it's not quite having the effect that she wants. Milo was born in 2010. He was born with serious health conditions. He was born 2 months early, and he had a huge tumor. So he's a Great Ormond Street baby. So he was one of those things in life that you really don't plan for, and they really throw you. But he's now thriving. He's also at school. He's 8 years old, and he's really into Marvel and Lego. And that is pretty much the only 2 things that he talks about. And along the way, I have got funding from a number of different research agencies. So this is what Ijeoma was talking about, Emma was talking about yesterday. We are constantly in a process of developing research ideas and applying for funding for them. And that's how we keep our program of research going. We fund our staff members, our students, and some of them also come with their own fellowship money. So that's how the research works. And I'm now going to tell you a little bit about the kind of research that I do. So my research can really be distilled into this question: why do some people become psychopaths? So psychopaths are individuals who are really, really antisocial. They are often very violent, and they are dangerous. So policymakers are very, very interested in trying to understand why does this condition develop and what can we do to prevent it. Because it's very costly for the government, so if you have to put somebody into the prison, particularly if that somebody is dangerous, that will cost the government a lot of money. So incarcerating someone who is seriously antisocial costs £200,000 a year to a taxpayer. That's how much it costs to keep somebody in a secure facility. And you're not at that point factoring in the fact that they are not in gainful employment, they're not paying their taxes. So for financial reasons alone, government wants to know what to do with people who have propensity to become seriously antisocial. These people are also really, really harmful for those around them. So they can be hurting others physically, but they can also cause a lot of emotional hurt to people around them. They can fraud people financially. So there are all sorts of reasons why we want to try and prevent psychopathy. Now, when you say the word psychopath, people often think of a serial killer. So there are a lot of movies like The Silence of the Lambs or No Country for Old Men, or We Need to Talk About Kevin. I don't know if one of you has seen one of these movies that are really about these killers that are very, very, very dangerous. And we have them in real life as well. So, for instance, perhaps one of the most famous real-life serial killers was Ted Bundy. He was born in the United States, and he was quite handsome. He was very, very charming and intelligent. And he was able to lure lots of young women to trust him, and he then killed them in really horrific ways. And I think he was in the end convicted of over 30 murders, but people estimate that the real number of murders was probably over 100. He just did not confess to all of them. And his defense lawyer's description of him was that he was the very definition of heartless evil. He could be extremely persuasive and charming, and he could con his victims, but he really had no empathy and he had no guilt. Now, not all psychopaths are serial killers, only very few are, but they are still dangerous and they are still causing havoc. And obviously, nobody's born a psychopath. So we, in our research group, want to find out what puts somebody at risk of developing that way. You don't get a disorder as a birthday present when you turn 18, so there are some warning signs earlier. But we want to know, can we spot some of those warning signs and can we maybe do something about them? And we can investigate risk for certain behaviors at a number of different levels of analysis. And this requires a lot of interesting scientific collaboration. So we can study behavior, for instance. We can look at what are the things that characterize individuals with psychopathy. And some of the early behavioral warning signs, which you can already see in children who are at risk of developing the condition, are that they lack remorse and guilt. So they just simply don't feel bad about what they've done. They lack empathy for other people. So most of us automatically resonate with other people's emotional experience. If you started crying, I would feel really, really sad. I'd feel uncomfortable. I'd want to comfort you. I'd want to make sure you're fine. An individual who has psychopathy doesn't feel that way. They are capable of keeping on hurting you because they just do not feel your pain. They have what psychologists call shallow affect, so they don't form the normal attachment relationships with other people. So it seems that the things that most of us find really rewarding, like hanging out with friends, pleasing other people, showing other people that we care and love them, just are not having the same effect for these guys. They are very good at manipulating others for their own gain. So here's an interesting difference with individuals who are on the autism spectrum. They know what somebody else is thinking, but they just don't feel for other people. And that's the perfect toolkit for manipulating other people to your own ends. If you can know what makes them tick, but you simply don't care about possibly hurting them, you can really use other people to your own ends. They have a sense of being more important and deserving than other people, so they are entitled for everything good in the world, even if it's at the expense of other people. So I often call this as really, really looking out for number one. That's what these guys are good at. And when we see this sort of set of traits in children, we call it callous unemotional traits. So we obviously don't want to label a child a psychopath, and many children who have these sorts of traits don't go on to develop a full-blown adult disorder. But we do know from longitudinal research that if you have this constellation of characteristics, you are at an increased risk of developing persistent antisocial behavior and psychopathy. We can then check what is it in the psychological level that might explain why these individuals behave in the way that they do. And we can do a number of different psychological tests to check this out. And one of these sorts of tests is that we can give them faces, and we can ask them to name what emotion the face displays. So I want you to try this. When you think you know what emotion the face is showing, shout it out, don't be shy.
Joy, happy.
Yeah, so here is a happy face developing into broader and broader smile. And this is an easy emotion. Most people can pick this up very, very quickly. What about this one? Fear. Yeah, so this is fear. And you can recognize fear by huge amount of eye whites that are shown. So this is someone who's really scared of something. And these are the expressions that individuals with psychopathy have difficulty in picking up. So they don't automatically orient their attention to fear faces, and they have difficulty recognizing them. So using that sort of paradigm and lots of others, ourselves and other groups have really shown that these individuals lack the recognition and reactions to other people's emotions, particularly to other people's distress emotions. So seeing someone else in distress just simply doesn't have the same impact on them as it does to you and me. And we think that that's one of the reasons why they don't display empathy and they don't display guilt, because simply that distress didn't get to them. Now, it would be very surprising if their brains were entirely typical, given that their thought processes and the way they feel emotions is different. So we can research brain function by using MRI scanners, and some of you saw one in action yesterday and others will see it today. So it essentially looks like a giant donut. You have to go and lie inside it very, very quietly. It's almost like you can think of it as taking photos of the brain in action. So you have to be very still. If you move, you get blurry photos, just as you get blurry photos if you take a photo of someone and they're running really fast. They're very loud, because you get changes in strong magnetic fields, and that's what makes the sound. But people usually wear headphones and they look at something, and then we can look at the brain's blood flow as a result of someone processing the incoming information. And using this sort of techniques, we have shown, for instance, that a brain region called the amygdala, which is the part of your brain that is very important for picking up important information and emotions in your surroundings, is not functioning in a typical way in children who are at risk of developing psychopathy. So here is their right amygdala. When we show them fearful faces, and we show them even subliminally, so they don't even consciously, they're not aware that they see it, they show less reactivity in their amygdala than typically developing children, but also than other people, other boys with conduct problems. So this is not just something that every child who has behavioral problems shows. This is something that's very specific to those children who lack the empathy and lack the guilt. And this is just one finding. Other research groups have found this same thing using slightly different paradigms that probe emotional function. And that's very important. One of the really critical things in science is you don't just believe in your own data. You try it again, and you also hope that other people find the same thing. And the more replications you get of the same phenomenon, the more confident you are that this is the case. Research by our group and other groups has also shown that these individuals have genetic vulnerability to this condition. It doesn't mean that they are genetically destined to become psychopaths, but it means that just in the same way as some of you will have stronger genetic vulnerability to heart disease or anxiety, for instance, than others, there are some children who have stronger genetic vulnerability for developing this condition. We also know that there are some environmental conditions that either don't counteract the genetic risk or make it worse, and we are still finding out precisely what they are. We know that not all the environmental risk factors that impact development of antisocial behavior are relevant for this condition. And we're trying to find out, are there something perhaps protective that we could put into place to stop children from developing this condition. And one of the things that we want to look at is whether consistently rewarding good behavior and helping them to see how they can look after number one in more pro-social ways will be useful for these children. And obviously all of this will need to be done in a framework where we try to understand development and how these different levels of inquiry impact each other over development. It's a very complex task. Studying human behavior is difficult, and that is one of the reasons why I am so passionate about trying to increase diversity in science. At the moment we have too many white men doing the job, and we don't therefore have all the brightest people trying to solve the difficult research problems that I'm trying to crack, or that Ijeoma is trying to crack, for instance. So the distribution of ability is equal in all parts of the population. Now, if we only get one bit of the population to a particular profession, that means that we have a lot more clever people out there than are actually doing the job. Because if we only sample the white man distribution, we're going to get slightly dumber white men, because only white men get a look in. What we need is the most clever women and people from different ethnic groupings, so that we get the very top end of the distribution from every grouping, and we can have all the brightest people doing the science. And at the moment, we haven't achieved that, and we need to get better.